Toastmaster for almost 2 years. He currently holds the officer position, in his own words, of Nuthin, N-U-T-H-I-N. He enjoys karaoke, fiddle, guitar, more karaoke, bowling, exercise, and more karaoke. This is his 10th speech, which is meant to persuade from the Confident Communication Manual. This speech will be 6 minutes in length. I'd like to introduce Roger, who chose this topic because he wants to lead mankind to the next step in evolution. Please welcome Roger with his speech titled Fear and Anger, Mankind's Self-Destruct Buttons, Good versus Evil Rules of the Universe, Part 2, or as some would say, Part 2.
Fellow Toastmasters, honored guests, I know the honored guests must be really disappointed about missing Part 1. Don't worry, it's on YouTube. Fear and Anger, Mankind's Self-Destruct Buttons. I don't get very angry these days. It's really hard to get me angry. The purpose of this speech is to inspire you folks to not get angry. One of the ways I convince myself to not get angry, I'm convinced that fear and anger are my self-destruct buttons. I'm going to talk about this in this speech. I'm going to outline as follows. I'm going to talk about my perception of the rules of the universe. Then I'm going to talk about fear and anger and how they relate to each other. And then I'm going to talk about strategy for how to deal with fear and anger. The rules of the universe, I view the universe as duality. I've mentioned duality before. Duality is opposing forces, forces that oppose each other, but are part of the same energy stream. So they can't exist without each other. And that's how I view good versus evil. I've simplified the definition of good versus evil. Good, creation; evil, destruction. I view us as not having one God, but two gods. That's unusual. Most people don't view the universe that way. I call these, the most correct description of these forces I would call the force and the dark side of the force. But since I don't like to candy coat things, I call these forces God and Satan. Just get it out on the table, make everybody as uncomfortable as possible. God for creation, Satan for destruction. Destruction is a valid purpose in the universe. Everything that's created needs to be destroyed, even me someday. So the purpose, the way to handle Satan is not to be afraid and not to be angry, but to understand. And my goal is to avoid my destruction as long as possible. So the rules of the universe that I perceive, and probably nobody will believe this, that's okay. You're in a conspiracy theory of the universe here. The rules of the universe is that God and Satan both have infinite powers. I view them as equals. Neither one is omnipotent, though. Their infinite powers are only applicable to their respective realms. So if you decide to follow Satan, God is powerless to protect you. If you decide to follow God, Satan is powerless to destroy you. Those are my particular views of the universe. So how does Satan get good to destroy itself? So evil is not allowed to destroy good. Evil must convince good to destroy itself. Back almost 30 years ago, I went to resistance training for the Air Force Reserves. Resistance training, we pretended to be in a POW camp. It was not fun. It was one of the most enlightening experiences I've ever had, and I never want to do it again. And one of the things they taught us in training is that if we're a prisoner, the guards don't like to harm the prisoners. Instead, they would rather get the prisoners to harm themselves. So we got this in the training. And sure enough, in this pretend prisoner camp, they took us prisoner, put us in this pretend prisoner camp, and they told the youngest airman there, either you carry these rocks around or we're going to shoot your friends. So just these vibrations out of the air, just vibrations through the air. And so this person's carrying all these rocks around. They're real heavy, and it would hurt his arms. And then the guards would tell him, get on the ground and do these exercises, and bend backwards, farther, farther. And it struck me, the image just struck me, to watch these people there moving nothing but their jaws and their tongue, and watching this person just harm himself. So that really struck me, and in the decades since then, I've just been more convinced than ever that people destroy themselves. You have to be convinced to destroy yourself. You have to be seduced into it. The relation of fear, part 2, the relation of fear versus anger. Back over 30 years ago, the first wife and I took a class on an Air Force base called Parent Effectiveness Training. And here's something that either you'll believe or you won't believe. I believed it right away, and I still believe it. The instructor described anger as a secondary emotion. He said that always fear lies underneath anger. If you get cut off in traffic, you first are afraid that you're going to get in an accident, and then you get angry. I've had people tell me, well, I was angry, but I wasn't afraid. But if you look deep enough, you will always find fear below anger. Always. Sometimes it's proper to appear to be angry. It's never proper to actually be angry. Those are the self-destruct buttons. And finally, how I deal. Here's something else that helped me control my anger. Back 10 years ago, I was working for a computer company. I went out and set up a bunch of computers out in Toledo for a school. Came back, and back then I used to get angry if somebody complained about my job performance. I figured they were hitting me in the pocketbook. So the computers were all working, I was pleased, I came back. 3 months later, the customer calls up and says, none of the computers are working, we don't want to pay. So I got pretty disturbed about that. I figured he was hitting me in the pocketbook. This is affecting my job performance. So I got pretty angry, and the store manager called me in, and he told me something that changed my perspective since then. And he said, Roger, if I have a problem with your performance, I'll tell you. And I haven't said anything. So I don't have any problem with your performance. But I want you to call that customer, and here's what I want you to tell that customer. I want you to tell that customer, I want you to say to that customer whatever you need to say to get the most money possible. And ding, a little light bulb went on. Boy, does that ever make sense? It's just business. Customers will complain. They'll complain about anything. And harm versus the illusion of harm. Am I harmed even if I lose a job? Well, what if I lose a job and get a better job? And the answer to that question is, I don't know if I've been harmed until later on. So the illusion of harm can get us to be angry, can get us to be afraid. So my point being that fear and anger, I view those as the exact same emotion. They never do any good. Like I said, sometimes it's good to appear to be angry. So part 3, strategies. How do I handle enemies? And even though I don't get angry, still have enemies, I define an enemy as somebody who's proactively seeking my destruction. The way to handle enemies is, number 1, avoidance. Good cannot destroy evil, so my strategy is avoid it and let it destroy itself. I'm not a hero. I'm not going to go in and try to stop evil somewhere. I just get away and let it destroy itself. In summary, I view good and evil as the same emotion. It's meant to, Satan has to convince us to be angry, uses these tools to convince us to destroy ourselves. Don't be angry, be happy. Madam Toastmaster.
Thank you very much, Robert.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're going to allow for 2 minutes.